Executive Director of Smart Youth Network Initiative. The reason that's why we came up with Smart Youth Network Initiative is to make sure that the young people have capacity to contribute to sustainable communities, but also to share their voices to government in making sure that we have climate change-friendly policies regarding to climate change. I want to also inform the public that our organization really worked hand in hand with partners to make sure that we bring in the voices of young people in the draft and development of the climate change bill. I want to appreciate this government making sure that the climate change bill was passed and now it is into law. And it was the efforts of young people. Because when you talk about climate change issues, the effects of climate change that are happening in Bududa, in Kasese, they immediately affect the young people. And today now in Kasese we have what we call the climate change refugees. When you go to that refugee in Kasese, they are mainly young people.
Not refugees, internally displaced people.
Yes,
climate change internally displaced
for us now we call them climate change refugees. So these are the bad effects, the adverse effects of climate change. So for us as young people, when we talk about climate change, this is the issue that is impacting us seriously. So we want to call upon all young people to come on board, to make sure that their voices are heard, so that we really have local solutions to address issues of climate change in this country.
Well, I thank you very much. Yes, back to Ayebare, Denisi, you're among the young people who are actually going to attend the Stockholm Plus 50 in Sweden. That is from 29 up to 5th. 29th May up to 5th June. What are the crucial issues perhaps that you'd wish addressed in relation to climate change education?
Well, you see, we as young people, in most cases, we have been suppressed by the societal narrative of, you know, if you're a young person, you do not really have a big idea and all that is, right? So that's why we are seeing many of these organizations coming up and telling people that we need the youth. Because I personally, I believe it is better to teach young people than repair old people, yeah? So I think by getting a platform to go to Stockholm, it helps to address these issues, like Nurdin said, that are affecting the youth. We think that we as the youth, even being vulnerable, these are the issues that are affecting us in our day-to-day lives, right? So at Stockholm, I think if given a platform, one would address how people in the most affected areas, more so the youth, are vulnerable and they still need their voices to be heard, or they still need their ideas to be given that chance or that opportunity to make sure we have a healthy planet, right? So as the whole theme about Stockholm is a healthy planet and all that, we need these young people to have ideas that are going to positively change the world, coming up with renewable, maybe mechanisms to make sure we have a friendly environment, and also thirdly, where their voices are going to be heard and they're going to have their solutions actualized. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Denisi. Yes, Nurdin.
Yes.
Let's look at the expectations of the young people at Stockholm, and perhaps because this is 50 years after the first Stockholm meeting in 1972, addressing issues of climate change. Why is it that Uganda and many other countries have not yet adopted climate change education?
Yes, thank you so much. I'm happy that I'm going to represent young people in Sweden. And for me, one of the issues that I will carry with me in Sweden is to make sure that, because you see when we talk about climate change, that developed countries committed to support the least developed countries like Uganda and Africa. I realized that these people have not come to their commitment. When they went through the Paris Agreement, these people are supposed to make sure that the least developed countries get financing they want. So for me, one of my voices is to make sure that these countries are supposed to commit to what we call climate financing. And this will help us to make sure that climate change related information is put in our national curriculum. We are recently advocating, working with Plan International and KCCA, to have some of these readers printed out using the National Curriculum Development Center to make sure that this climate change related information is known by all young people in this country. But then you realize that we are hindered by resources. The government doesn't have the budget to finance the printing of these readers, and we want to make sure that when these superpower countries like USA, like China, like Japan, like UK, they should really commit to financing the development of these climate change readers, so that we can really have what we call climate change education in this country.
Yes, climate change education is actually key in not only Uganda but every developing country. Now back to Denise, because we look at now the students especially, that they are always at the forefront of destroying the environment, and remember that a destruction of the environment is one of the key factors in climate change. So how do we bring the students on board so that they can be actually ambassadors of the conservation of the environment, can actually be ambassadors of having a very, very good environment?
Okay, sure, thank you. So apparently we as Cherish Aid Foundation, what we have been doing is to carry out debates and such discussions in schools, where we give students motions or discussions that are going to entirely be based about climate education. Like for example, this house would ban Kavera use in Uganda, or such motions, so that we engage them to see the disadvantages of destroying the environment. This is at a point in time that we are advocating for paper use rather than Kavera in schools, or we do not want most of the students to use these caveras even on reporting days, like schools going on to ban this, right? But also otherwise, we need like funds or resources to make sure that the government gets to invest into such education, or maybe like trying to put it on the curriculum to make sure that they are aware of what is happening. Because like I said, from now, like if we are to reach in 2040, we're going to face adverse effects at a point in time that we cannot reverse them. And we are the last generation that can actually do something about it, right? So we need to make sure that there is this awareness through, like what Nurdin said, like providing the readers materials, like making sure that these students engage in such conversation. You get to engage them in policy implementation and alignation, so they can get to know what to do and what is necessarily important, the environment. Yeah.
Well, that is very, very important. Yes, let's get to Nurdin. One of the ways we can actually mitigate effects of students destroying the environment is actually dissuading them against strikes, because every other time there's a strike, there's a destruction of trees, grass, flowers, and so on. So how do we manage this?
Yes, I want to agree with you that whenever there are strikes, the environment suffers. You know, they go ahead to burn cars, they go ahead to cut trees and all that. But you are aware that there are other issues that we really need to first address that concern the young people, like unemployment. And when we talk about climate change information and climate change education, we don't talk about only going to class and, you know, studying what is environment and all that. So for us to have, because we now have two issues like, as young people, unemployment, and then there is this issue of climate change. And one of the things is to make sure that we do what we call green jobs. This is how we can really attract young people, to make sure that they bring their local solutions to achievement and protection of the environment and fighting for climate change. So you realize that these days we are now transiting from fossil energy to renewable energy. And young people are key to making sure that, because when you talk about clean energy and renewable energy, these are all innovations, startups, and creatives. So if we want to bring on young people to the role of climate change, we need to make sure that we have policies that will really attract them to engage, but also have friendly environment, enabling environment for them to exercise their full potential, for them to exercise their creativity and innovation. And this is where we shall see that we are also in the line of what we call renewable energy and clean energy. We are now in 2 wars of no fuel and all that, but if we really bring on young people to innovate, I heard when the head of state is saying that we should really use sugarcane to create fuel and all that. So these technologies, we should really first go ahead and teach the young people, or mobilize the young people to come on board, share their solutions, and this is where we will have solutions spearheaded by the young people of this generation.
Well, Denise, we see that actually schools are agents of environmental destruction, in a sense that most boarding schools use firewood, and they only get firewood after destroying our forests, after cutting down trees. What ought to be done so that really we can see an end to this, so that every other time schools are reopening, our forests should not suffer? Actually, during the time we had the lockdowns, our forests were celebrating because there was no one to really cut them down for timber, for firewood. Yes.
So I think now this becomes a legal issue where we go back to the policy implementation of what we implement and what should the people align with. You see, when we pass a policy, we expect it to be followed up and to make sure that the people who are included, the stakeholders, make sure that they ensure that that policy happens, yeah? So when we say that we should not cut down the forest or we should not cut down the trees, and this goes on, it rather makes our systems weak and all that, yeah? So we think that what schools should do, they should start investing in things such as renewable resources like solar, using solar for cooking rather than the firewood, because it gets to help the environment too, right? But then, as I said, we think that this is an issue of policy implementation, yeah? So we should have like those strict regulations that are going to be implemented. If you say that you should not cut down the trees, schools also inclusive should not get to do this. So I think that they should adopt to more solar energy for cooking in such schools to make sure we reduce down the cutting of forests.
We need to get alternative sources of energy in schools so that we can reduce on really cutting down of trees in quest or in search for firewood. Yes, still tuned to BC TV and this education forum. Yes, back to Nordin. Very many young people attend such conferences only to come back and perhaps show us the pictures of the cities they've been to. So yes, let us see what happens after Stockholm. Do you have a plan to perhaps see how the resolutions that will have been passed, especially during the youth forums, how perhaps students and schools can benefit from such resolutions, and perhaps see how they can also implement them at school level?
Yes, thank you so much. Now, for us to realize the resolutions from Stockholm or from such international event is through partnership and collaboration. You know, for us as young people, would want to really come to media and make sure that we pass on the information that we would have got from wherever we are, but realize that there is lack of partnership and less of commitment. So if there is partnership, we can really showcase, because for us we really have the zeal and the love to do what we do, the passion, but realize that for us to implement the resolutions of certain meetings, there is lack of coordination and then lack of partnership. But if there is strong partnership and strong coordination, trust me, we cannot just show you pictures of cities and all that. And then for us as young people, we have gone ahead to utilize social media so much. You realize that when we go there, we post pictures, of course, but then we continue the engagement online on social media, because we believe very many young people are on social media. But the issue of partnership and coordination, it is hindering for us to implement the resolutions of this meeting. So if media houses like UBC, government, and then other partners, and then the youth groups, if they come on board together to commit that let us implement the resolutions of these meetings, I believe we can have a sustainable future and achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, the Uganda Vision 2040, and the East African or the African Union Vision of 2026, something like that.
Yes, Dennis, let's look at how you people in the civil society, or the civil society, especially those that are actually looking at issues of climate change and conservation of the environment, how best you can work with education institutions so that really we can mitigate the effects of climate change not only in Uganda but on the continent.
Well, I think that for civil spaces and everything, they need to engage the students. Well, we think that these people have the ideas, we the young people have the ideas, But what is lacking is the platform to air out these ideas. Well, like we said, the schools and all the civil spaces should give opportunity to these various students, and not only in Uganda or East Africa, but the whole of Africa. Because we think that climate change is a global problem or not an individual problem that is going to affect them individually. But on a global scale, when these people are given the platform, they have the partnerships, they have the resources, then they could be able to change the world or to help to mitigate the climate change problems.
Yes, Nurdin.
Yes.
Yes, how do you, from the civil society, the NGOs, how do you work with institutions, education institutions, to mitigate effects of climate change?
Yes, thank you so much. Education institutions are key. Like I said, for us to really fight climate change, we need to have partnership and coordination. You realize that many of the young people and the youth are in schools. And I am happy with Makerere University and IU, and then other schools, because they have gone ahead to make sure that they have climate change departments, but also have climate change clubs to make sure that young people have platforms for them to debate, to mobilize the solutions, but also to group themselves to create solutions to address issues of climate change. And education systems are key, because when we worked with our partners to develop these climate change readers, we were going to distribute these materials in schools, in primary, because we want to make sure that we groom these young people. They are the futures of tomorrow. We want to make sure that these P7, P6 kids, P4, P5, they know the disadvantages of throwing a kavera or of disposing of a plastic waste. But also, since we are now have what we call education for sustainable development, we are looking at green jobs, making sure that they have those skills to make the briquettes, making sure that when we talk about solar energy, wind energy, we want to make sure that these young people have the skills and the knowledge and the creativity to make sure that they harness technology to come up with those solar panels. In Uganda, I think it is only one company that, and it's owned by Indians, that can really manufacture solar. And yet, in Uganda, there are a lot of villages, a lot of homes who cannot access the grid. So we really need to make sure that the young people take on the seat, take on the leadership, and this comes with support and commitment from the institutions. So institutions are key. And then for us, we've been also working with young people in institutions, in schools, because they are always grouped there, they are organized. Because civil society doesn't have money to really mobilize youth from communities. But when we find organized communities like schools, like universities, like tertiary institutions, for us we can really go ahead and try to make sure that we really debate on issues of climate change, issues of sustainable development, but also collect solutions to address issues of climate change, but also formulate policies and making sure that we really appreciate the energy of young people in climate change.
Yes, still tuned to BC TV, and we are looking at climate change education, our collective obligation for social transformation. Definitely, we can never think of transforming our society if we actually don't prioritize our environment. Now let's look at schools, because schools are agents of change, agents of transformation. How do we rope them into this struggle, into this campaign of ensuring that we keep our environment clean and we keep it safe for everyone?
Yes. Now, when we talk about bringing in schools, you realize that some of these schools have limited budgets to make sure that they pay teachers and all that. But then, some of these schools, when we talk about universities and secondary schools, they normally run, their program is normally set by government, because they are not allowed to teach anything that the government didn't approve and all that. And realize that we do not have any course on climate change or environment. And then we really want to make sure that climate and environment, climate change and environment, we want to draw a gap between them. Because when we talk about climate change, we are talking about global warming, we are talking about science evidence or data, we are talking about issues of renewable energy. And for us to really harness or bring young people in this fight of climate change, we need to work with tertiary institutions. And we need to finance these climate change education materials, but also climate change is a sort of a technical or a science-based or a research something. So we need to invest more in making sure that the information is shared, but also teachers who teach the young people are retooled or reskilled in making sure that as far as climate change is concerned. Because for us as Uganda, we committed under the NDCs to make sure that we reduce our carbon emission by a certain number. So this is all science related, and we want to make sure that the teachers first of all have capacity to deliver on this message. So the more we educate our teachers, but so the more we bring on this climate change information so close to the young people, is the more we shall get the solution that we are looking for. Because these students or these schools cannot run this climate change education because they don't have budgets. And recently we are now into budget allocation and all that, but then we need to interrogate how much was allocated to climate change information or climate change education. Or we are now running the new curriculum. Are those teachers aware of climate change? Do they know the effect of climate change to environment, effects of climate change to women and children, effect of climate change to the well-being of a person? Do they know the gender issues and then climate change? So for us as a country, we need to commit resources, but also we need to invest more in capacity building to make sure that when we talk about renewable energy, when we talk about climate change mitigation and adaptation, people know, and then people represent their solutions and commitment to make sure that we have zero emission, we don't litter the environment, we don't cut the trees and all that.
Well, Denise, we see a mushrooming culture whereby most schools actually no longer have compounds. They have sold off the playgrounds, or the playgrounds have been grabbed by influential people. You find that even the compounds are not there. They treasure putting up buildings everywhere. It's actually, that our schools no longer have the green belts. So how do we reverse that so that people can appreciate that actually a school are not only buildings, but also the environment must also be conducive for learners?
Well, you see, as a country as Uganda, we adopted to make sure that we follow the SDGs. And one of the SDGs becomes SDG 13, climate change. But you see, when you look at climate change, it's one that is going to affect every other SDG. So if we are to achieve all the SDGs, then it ought to solve the climate change. So you see, the issue comes back to quality of education. When we do not have a conducive environment for learners to have their lessons, or for them to have a comfortable environment where they're going to have that self-actualization, fulfillment as they are learning, then we think that the quality education, which is SDG 4, cannot be achieved. Yeah. So I think that now it comes back, each of us needs to have a responsibility, not only the schools, but also individuals. We ought to have that individual obligation where we think that if you see a cavera somewhere, you should pick it up. When you see this, you should pick it up. It does not necessarily now come back to the schools, but now we should put it to an individual level where we think that we all have that moral obligation to society to make sure we protect the environment. Yeah. But even besides that, we think that schools ought to notice that when there is a calm environment, environment, let me say when there is that afternoon breeze in lessons or something like that, students are going to be active. You know, personally as a student, there is that life you experience in the afternoon when it is very hot. You know, schools such as that have conducive environments, that have compounds, that have trees. You talk about the likes of traditional schools, which are still protecting their compounds and everything.
Yeah, because they have a lot of land.
Exactly.
But look at private schools, really
So this is something they should ought to invest in, as they want to maximize the profits. You know, you won't get students as private entities if your environment does not favor the students, yeah? So that is one of the things actually they should be using to market their schools. So that when the students have the conducive environment, then they can produce the work, yeah? So that brings the students even to those schools that are existing, yeah? So I think also the whole moral obligation to the schools and the students is one thing we should emphasize, because it all comes back to the responsibility. If we teach about all these things, climate education and everything, but then we do not feel obligated to make sure that we protect our environment, then it doesn't make sense in the long run. So we need to ought as schools to put in that moral obligation, to put in that responsibility, to put in that whole awareness that when you see this, make sure you pick it. And besides that, schools used to have posters that, you know what, this is the compound, like you should not trespass, or we should not cut down trees and all those things. But nowadays, as we see on, schools want to set up buildings, but then ignoring the fact that students are not going to be happy in an environment that is not conducive for them to study. So we think that schools should understand that the whole green environment gets to help these people, gets to help them, to comfort them, and then they are able to learn and gain that quality education. But in the instances, schools do not invest in the compounds and everything, then at the end of it all, students are not going to be in a conducive environment, and they will also lose out.
Yes, and students will always lose out, or schools will actually lose out. Now, let's look at the private players in the education sector, because when you look at government schools, the traditional schools, they have enough land, and indeed they plant trees and try to protect the environment. But let's look at these businessmen who have invaded the education sector, and they are turning every building into a school, and they are trying to fit a school even on a small piece of land. So how do they do that? On one side, looking at profit maximization, as well as also ensuring that they are agents of climate change education, they are also agents of conservation of the environment.
Yes. First of all, I want to appreciate the private players in education, because for me as a person, I see that they are doing a very good job. Because when you say that every room they see, they turn into a school. Uganda has a young population, and we cannot have a young population that is uneducated and skilled. So we need as many private players as possible. We need as many schools as possible.
School is not all about classrooms.
Yes.
Yes, school is not all about classrooms, not all about buildings. Yes, actually a school is an amalgamation, combination of so many things. But now the private players have reduced schooling to classroom, because actually there are co-curricular activities that require a good space, planting trees, keeping the environment clean, planting of flowers, going for gardening is part of the co-curricular activities. So now let's look at the private players. They have concentrated more on academics, leaving out the other side of education.
Okay, when you bring the discussion to that angle, for me I want to urge it that it is still government. Government has to come up with a policy that says that all private schools that do not have a compound, or that don't have space for young people to practice agriculture, that small agriculture, to plant trees, they should buy space, buy land somewhere, and then try to plant trees. Because realize that there is what we call carbon emissions. Those factories that really emit our environment, they have gone ahead to buy space, to buy land, and plant these trees. And you find that an acre of trees it is at a certain amount of money. That's what we call carbon credits. So these private players, I think they can also adopt to that model, but still it is I think it is the government to come on place and regulate. Say that if you're a private school, you have certain amount of land, please buy land somewhere and then plant trees. This is how we shall bring in private players. Because where I come from, it is just on the road and there is a big flat like this. So they are all classrooms and you find that they have a lot of students, but then they don't have a compound and those students don't even play. When it's break time, they remain in class because they don't have where to play from. But when we want to bring in such players into climate change support, the campaign, they should really buy space somewhere and try to make to also play their part in making sure that adoption and mitigation of climate change is concerned.
Actually, one of the there's a friend of mine who told me that the traditional Christian churches, the Catholics, the Anglican Church of Uganda, the SDAs, are pillars of conservation of the environment. Because look at the traditional churches that everywhere there is a church, there are trees all over. The compound is always well kept and neat. And look at schools owned by the traditional religions, okay, the traditional churches, and we have schools owned by the Catholic Church, schools owned by the Anglican Church, schools owned by the SDAs. You'll find that they actually always have enough. So why can't the private players borrow relief from such organizations?
Now, when you talk like that still, I want to really urge it that, you know, it is all about the amount of money you have when you're setting up a business. And private players, they normally focus on the amount of money they have. But what we should now insist on is what we call the social enterprise. They should do business, but with that heart of social enterprise. Because when you really focus on business, on getting money, and then you end up living on supporting people, protecting the environment and all that. But then it is not all about the issue of having space. It is about the issue of making sure that the information is reaching the people, the education is reaching the people. When you look at the people in Bududa who die every day because of climate change, when you look at the people of Kasese who die because of climate change and floods, it is not the issue of trees, you know, it is the issue of information. So we really want to call on government, call on private sector, call on all players to really invest in what we call climate change education and information. Because when people of Bududa, when they have those machines, all that information of early warnings, they know that such a time it's gonna, the landslides are going to come. Such a time, the floods are going to come. There we shall really save a number of people. So let us try to really shift the discussion to really focus on education, climate change, education and information.
Yeah, focusing on climate change education is really very, very key. Yes, Denise, really I can see time's not our best ally. How do we move forward in ensuring that climate change education is embraced, adopted at all levels, primary, secondary, universities, even outside school? Is how do we adopt this, that actually one can even know that yes, it is my duty to educate or to teach a neighbor on the effects of climate change and how we can avoid it?
Well, thank you so much. First of all, I would like to thank the government because in the current curriculum, I think that was adopted last year, they emphasize more student-to-student learning, where students are free. Let me say, in the afternoons, they have to go for PE lessons, they have to go and maybe dance or read for themselves and make research, yeah? So that is one aspect where we think that even when they are doing that, they should add maybe a course outline or they should add a syllabus that is going to talk about climate education in schools, right? Like majority of the population in Uganda, most of them you could only meet them in schools. Yeah. So we think we ought to need to start with primary level, go to the secondary level, educate to the university level, where we have this climate change discussion and education, where people know that, you know what, you're going to harm the environment if you do this, you're going to do this. And well, for the people outside the schools and all those spaces, we think we need what is active sensitization. Yeah, we need active sensitization of the masses, where they know that, you know what, this is going to be harmful to the government, it's going to be harmful to the environment. And thirdly, the government ought to put like strict regulations, like maybe people constructing on swamps should stop, maybe people carrying out all this ban Kavera use here and here. Industries should get to change their internal production mechanisms. Like for example, if they are producing they're emitting these gases, they should get means where they're going to produce which is more environmental friendly rather than all that is going to distract. So we think that this climate education ought to be actively given out to the people, actively known to the masses, and the government should get to do its role. So here it's like a win-win situation where we have the citizens' responsibility and also the responsibility of the government. We think it's all our moral obligation to make sure that we save the environment, given that education and given that the masses get to know about the adverse effects of climate change.
Yeah, the World Environmental Day is just around the corner, and I'm sure some of you will be celebrating it in Stockholm. Let's look at, yes, we normally celebrate this during our days. That is the day we would actually move out, plant trees in the neighborhood. So how do we also promote such a culture that during such a day there's a lot of tree planting activities, especially done by students?
Yes, yeah, we want to really appreciate this country to making sure that they have really adopted the international celebrations to turn them into the national celebrations. So yeah, this day is really coming, and for us we shall be in Sweden in making sure that we lobby for climate change financing and all that. But then we want to mobilize and then call upon all the young people. On that day, let all young people plant trees. I know there are people who are going to be born in that month. So you plant a tree on your birthday to make sure that really conserve the environment and then protect the future generation. But when we talk about climate change and the World Environment Day, we want to really focus on investment, what we call sustainable investment, looking at the planet first, the people second, and then profit last. So, and in this country, since we want to create many jobs, you find that wetlands are encroached on, forests are encroached on. So, I think when we really need to use these natural resources, we should have alternatives. Why would you put a washing bay in a wetland? Why don't you do what you call fish farming? So for me, coming to the topic of the day, climate change education, for me, this is the type of knowledge that I want the public to get, alternatives. Because someone will say, me, I don't have money, I want to cut a tree, get charcoal and sell it. So how can we make sure that we share this information, we educate the masses? So I want to call upon the public to use the World Environment Day to pass on this information. Instead of doing a washing bay in a wetland, do fish. Instead of cutting trees, you can adopt to solar energy, biogas, wind energy, but also use briquettes instead of cutting trees for firewood.
Well, thank you very much, Nordin. Yes, let's go to Ivory. Denise, time is not our best ally. You parting shot, your last message to the viewer, the student out there, the youth out there, so that they can know that climate change is not only the responsibility of policymakers in government, but also at their individual level, as students, as teachers, as school administrators, as educationalists, as parents. So what message do you have for them?
Well, like I said, we are having increasing bushfires, landslides, floods in Kasese, Wududa, everywhere. So when this is happening, it does not affect the government. Actually, we the people, or we the individuals that remain behind, are greatly affected because we lose family members, we lose friends, and besides that, that can't make us happy. So that's why I passed my last message and tell you that this is something that it's an individual responsibility, it's our moral obligation to make sure that we protect the environment. So let's take it on as our responsibility and not leave it to the government or anyone else, but make sure we do the needful.
Yeah, thank you very much, Denise, who is the CEO, Better Life, and also the programs or coordinator of Cherish Aid Foundation. Yes, Nordin Businje, your parting shot.
Yes, my last remarks, first of all, I want to thank government and partners for making sure that we have now the climate change bill. But my prayers is that I call upon government to really finance climate change education, but also call upon private players to also make sure that they contribute their support and their commitment towards a sustainable environment. Thank you so much.
Well, Amma, thank you very much, Businje Nordin, the CEO of Smart Youth Initiative, Smart Youth Network Initiative. Yes, Nordin and Denise are among the youth, the young people, who are actually going to be representing Uganda at Stockholm Plus 50 in Sweden. Of course, it is a conference that brings together all the world players on matters of environment and climate change. Thereafter, of course, there will also be the International Environmental Day still in Stockholm, Sweden. And we hope that you'll ably represent us, and when you come back, be able to share the best practices with schools, the young people, so that together we can improve on our environment. Mandakola Mzima is my name, and I thank you very much, dear viewer, for keeping it on UBC TV and for being with us, particularly on Education Forum. Until next Saturday, I'm saying bye-bye.